Greetings friends, welcome back to the workshop. You've already seen it from the title. Today we are making a Cable-Damascus everyday carry knife. It's 26 degrees out here, so let's light the forge and get warm. Alrighty friends, just an update. We've done 2 heats. So far they have gone beautifully. The steel is heating up again, so let's keep going. Alrighty, let's weld our next bar of Cable-Damascus. Alrighty friends, a lot has happened since I talked to you last. As you saw with the bandsaw, we cut the smaller pieces off the parent stock, and I just finished forge welding them together, and they welded beautifully. This is the 2 smaller bars welded together, and this is our 1 bigger bar that we doubled over. So essentially, I guess you would say this is 2 bars too. This one was just in separate pieces. So you can see we have quite a bit of extra material on this one that was 2 separate pieces. So now we're just going to trim that off, and we're going to clean up these sides. I'm actually going to grind them clean because I want them to bond very well to the carbon steel. We're going to sandwich that carbon steel between there, and we will be ready to do the last forge weld of this Cable-Damascus EDC knife. Well, friends, as much as I would like to keep working on this project, it is getting far too late, so I will have to work on this tomorrow, and I will see you right now. Yesterday, I ground the sides of this pretty much down to exactly the same level because as I forge weld it, when I stack the weld, I should say when I hammer the weld this way and then go to turn it this way to draw it out, I want to make sure that I don't have steel sticking above the others because they would collapse and it just get to be a mess. So I've ground these parallel. We have our piece of tool steel in the center. We have our Cable-Damascus on the sides. I think we're ready to set this weld. Friends, as far as I can tell, this is coming along beautifully. The atmosphere in that forge is just perfect for forge welding right now. It really doesn't get better than this. It's looking beautiful, but the sides are not perfectly, I don't know if you can actually see that, they're not perfectly lined up, which I knew they wouldn't be after doing such vigorous hammering on it. So I'm going to take it in there to the grinder and I'm going to clean up those sides so that when I want to forge it out and extend the length, I can hammer on those sides and not risk shearing any welds or anything. So let's go clean it up and then we will continue forging it out. What do you think, friends? I think it looks absolutely beautiful. I finished forging this thing flat, and I even used a flatter to make sure that the sides were as flat as I can reasonably get them by hand forging. I think it is now time to take this thing over to the milling machine, and I'm going to see if I can just clean up the sides to make sure they're perfectly flat. I need to be pretty careful doing that, though, because, as you know, we have the Damascus on the sides. If I take too much, I'm going to be cutting right through our layers of Damascus, and the layers of Damascus are only... They're really not that much. So let's go ahead and take it over there and just be really careful with it and see what we can do. Well, friends, this isn't working exactly how I thought it would. Maybe it's just that I'm a little bit too scared to keep milling with it because I don't want to bite into it too deep. So I'm going to try doing is I'm going to flip that billet up on its side and use the whole side of the bit so I cover the whole piece of steel as we go, and then I think I'll get a better idea and make sure I don't risk gouging it too deep. I have just more than sufficiently reminded myself how much of a machinist I am not, but I think we've done I think we've done good enough. It's not parallel, and those of you who are machinists probably saw the way I clamped it and thought, oh no, it flexes, so the sides aren't perfectly parallel. I hope I haven't done more damage than good, but one thing I am good at is holding an angle on the belt grinder. So we're going to take it over to that belt grinder and clean up this back area here where it's a little thicker because of the way it flexed. But other than that, I don't think we did any damage, but we'll soon know. I'm glad I did not continue using the milling machine. This thing is looking beautiful, and I did it on the belt grinder. It is fully flat enough, straight enough, parallel enough, everything enough for knife making. So now we get to move on to designing our knife. We have our finished shaping done here on the blade, and it looks beautiful. It is now time to start grinding the bevels, and I am trying to decide how steep to do the bevels on this, because if I do a full flat bevel, I'll be grinding off a lot of the Damascus that's on the sides. So I think I'm going to do kind of somewhere in between. We'll do that, and then we will drill the holes here in the tang. Then we'll be ready for the heat treating. Well, friends, we have an absolutely beautiful blade with absolutely beautiful bevels, but before I move forward, there's something I need to make sure of, and that is that our edge, right down the center, is lining up in that tool steel that we put in the middle. On one side, I can see it. On the other side, not so much. So what I need to do is I need to do a test etch. I need to make sure that I know what I'm working with, because if I need to grind the bevel a little further on one side or the other, I'm willing to do that. There are slight imperfections, of course, because this is a hand-forged blade, but let's go ahead and do a test etch. Let's figure out where that tool steel has actually lined up in there, and then we can move forward. As that blade is in the test etch, it's the perfect opportunity for me to look at all my handle material and decide what we want for this knife. I think I'm going to use this piece of Claro Walnut Burl. Look at that grain. For those of you who have followed me on Instagram at kenton.adams, you will have seen some Damascus chisels that I finished recently. This is the leftover wood from doing those Damascus chisels for Mr. Kyle Neuro at Neuro Hardwood. Look down in the description, you'll find a link to his Instagram page. Thank you so much, Mr. Kyle, for this leftover wood, because I think it's going to make a beautiful handle on this Cable-Damascus EDC knife. Now let's go see what the test etch has revealed. Well, now we know what we're working with. If you look on this side, you can actually see the tool steel clearly all the way down the edge, but if you look on this side, the tool steel does come all the way to the edge, but it's not quite as far as it should be. So I'm going to go ahead and grind one or two more passes on this side. Technically, it will make this bevel slightly higher than the other, but remember, we're going to etch this thing, and the etch is going to take away all visible traces of unevenness. So let's go ahead and do that bevel, and then we will be on to drilling the holes in the tang. You're probably wondering why I just hand sanded this whole beautiful blade to 320 grit when we haven't even gone into the quench or temper or any of the heat treating yet. The reason I did it is because it's far easier to sand a blade like this when it's soft. After it's hardened, it takes a lot more sanding. So by sanding most of it right now, I've eliminated probably a half hour of hand sanding after the quench. So we are now ready to heat treat this thing, so let's do it. Well, I just put on some relatively hefty coats of this high temperature spray paint. That is going to protect our hand sanded finish when it goes in the forge for hardening. So as soon as this thing is dry, let's continue on with our heat treating. Look at that, friends. It looks absolutely beautiful. You may have noticed by now how I don't really talk to the camera much during the intense times of knife making, like forge welding heat treating. That's because I can't focus on doing really good quality work and talk to the camera at the same time. So now let me explain what we've done. I went ahead and did a normalizing cycle first on this because as I forged it, I wasn't able to work the whole heated area at once, or much less heat the whole piece. So I wanted to even out all that grain structure. So I did a normalizing cycle, then we hardened it and used motor oil, and it hardened beautifully as you saw in the file test. Now we've tempered it. I've done a soft back job with the torch. I'm going to now take it inside and do a full tempering cycle. When I say full, over the whole blade at the temperature that the edge is tempered to. I wanted to use the torch to soften the spine more than the edge, but now I'm going to do a whole tempering cycle. Once that's done, we will be ready to sand the surfaces, get it ready for the etch, and the etch is always an exciting part of doing Damascus. So let's keep going. We've sanded it to a beautiful 400 grit finish, which is plenty fine for going into the etch, but I've actually thrown it back here into the drill press because I got some new drill bits and pin stock, and I decided that I wanted to put some slightly bigger pins. So I'm going to go ahead and just punch those holes, and then we'll go straight to the etch. Did you just see that? Drilling hardened steel is always like a roller coaster. These two pins back here drilled flawlessly, perfectly. That was a brand new bit too, a brand new cobalt bit. This one I went to drill, it drilled flawlessly through the Damascus because the Damascus is soft, hit that tool steel in the center, and I had to sharpen that bit 4 times before it went through. On the last time I flipped this over to drill all the way through, it finally punched through. By the time we went to lift it up, it had already pulled the blade out of the clamp because the bit had caught in the hole, and it whipped it around, hit the post on the drill press, but thankfully I'm still here to tell about it. So let's go ahead and put this into the etch. Oh, first I need to degrease it. In a blacksmith shop, there is no such thing as downtime, and the concept of having nothing to do does not exist. So while that blade is in the etch, it's the perfect opportunity for us to go ahead and cut up this Claro walnut burl. For cutting it up, we get to use the Shopsmith, and if you've seen my previous video on turning a red oak bowl out of a piece of firewood, you've seen this machine before, but for this time, we get to put on the table saw attachment, and that's what will allow us to slice this beautifully straight and everything, and I just can't wait to see this wood. It's going to match perfectly with this Cable-Damascus. It's going to turn out beautiful. The pattern's starting to come out and it's looking nice, but I need a little bit more variance in the surface as far as the depth of the etch, so I went ahead and put it back in. We'll leave it in for a little bit, we'll pull it out, and it should be done. The etch is done. And you're probably wondering why it still looks a little bit bland. That is because there is no contrast because of differing alloys in this cable. The cable that I used has all the same alloys, so we only get a pattern because of the weld joints. Now, we can still add in contrast. Here's how we'll do it. We're going to put this blade against this wire wheel. We're going to completely remove any contrast that is here. Then we will use bluing to darken the whole blade. And finally use 600 grit sandpaper to go ahead and shine the surface again, which will only shine the high points. Well, I have to say, that looks a lot nicer with the added contrast. In closing, I just want to say what a joy it's been having you along on the journey of creating part 1 of this little Cable-Damascus knife. I can't wait to see you on part 2 when we will finish the handle and have a finished knife to test out. But until I see you then, forge on.